Now, the G7 summit is behind us, and of course, a lot of topics were discussed. Joining us right now is a Lithuanian MP, Mr. Petras Auštrevičius, a former MEP and Lithuanian politician. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning. Thank you.
So a lot has been discussed when it comes to this G7 summit, and I'm hoping we can first round up some of the more important topics. Of course, we do know that Ukraine is one of the most important things that were discussed. Can you tell us something about it?
Well, indeed, we see G7 summit just ended in Italy, Apulia, and to my mind, it wasn't one more meeting of G7. If to look at the communique of the outcome of the summit, I would really emphasize the importance of this meeting and probably a possibility to agree on very strategic issues which bother the global politics at the moment. Indeed, a very primary focus on Ukraine. I would probably mention Gaza, China, Africa, and definitely Red Sea situation. I mean, coming on Ukraine, it was the major dominating issue of the G7 summit, which is most essential probably from the discussions and the decision taken. It's so-called extraordinary revenue acceleration loan platform, which was established by G7, meaning that by very short time, the G7 countries have agreed to launch a 50 billion loan for Ukraine, which comes from those gains of frozen sovereign Russian assets. It's a major breakthrough since before some countries were, not very decisively speaking about a possibility to have this kind of frozen assets gains taken by for the benefits of Ukraine. It's finally made, so I appreciate this decision. It's a major, so needed for Ukraine in terms of financial needs, and indeed a very strong solidarity-based approach was expressed by G7 countries, condemning Russia as aggressor state and stating that all those actions against Russia will remain in force until the end of aggression.
Right, like you mentioned, one of the biggest turning point is the approval of this 50 billion loan and using the windfall profits from Russian assets in order to replace some of these interests. So I'm wondering how that logistically would be done. We do see a lot of pledges when it comes to loan, financial support, and even one line about unblocking $20 billion when it comes to helping gender equality in the workforce. But not a lot has been was talked about how that would work out logistically. Where will the fund initially be coming from, and how will that in turn benefit Ukraine?
Well, in fact, financially speaking, it's a rather complicated decision in terms of the financial engineering. Remains to be seen. I mean, all details to be disclosed by those who made, those arrangements. But in essence, the loan will be based on taking gains from 300 billion Russian sovereign assets placed in West, invested in West, mainly in Belgium, as we know, and taking yearly gains, which might make from 3 to 5 billion euros every year. It becomes a very solid base for long-term, loan to be launched and to be used in 24-25, because Ukraine needs that money very urgently. And I hope will be any indecisive moments left after this decision, because we have to move with this decision on a global Western base. Since I appreciate much, it is a final decision agreement between US and Europe. Since there have been some differences up to now, how to use those gains and how to treat Russian sovereign assets invested in the West.
Right, and speaking of that communique that you just mentioned earlier, we actually did take a little dive into that particular article. It's a 36-page long article when it comes to China. Like you mentioned, it's also one of the biggest topic in this G7 meeting. However, when reading through the communique, I see like in all 27 instances of mentioning of China, it's usually packaged with the words "we call on China" or "we're concerned that China," without really having any concrete decisions being made. And I think that's also reflected on the rhetoric of the world leaders when, even though they are providing some strong rhetoric, we didn't see any actual concrete step being taken. What's the holdup? What are the things that these world leaders cannot agree on that kind of resulted in the hold of actual substantial actions?
Well, indeed, the point on China found it's one of the central places in communique, it's for sure. It looks like there was certain disagreement among world leaders, G7 leaders, I mean, how to treat China, how to send the right message, and what actions might be taken as China still supports Russia in aggression against Ukraine, as well threatening and interfering neighbors' policies in Southeast Asia. And, there are some certain tensions with Taiwan as well. But I hope this language will probably be useful for finding practical agreements, and especially on EU side, since the EU is a bit milder player on China, exposing its dependencies on China's economic ties and cooperation, investments. But, nothing finally is decided. Indeed, language is more like calling, condemning, and asking to stop certain unwelcomed policies, but remains to be seen. And I hope a new, leadership of the European Union coming this autumn will take something from that declaration in order to build its more, long-term and probably more proactive policy on China.
All right, and then turning our attention to other parts of the world, like you mentioned earlier, Gaza is also a very highly talked about topic during the G7 meeting. And I think the G7 leaders have also agreed on the two-state solution, as well as ceasefire and return of hostages, which is something that the world has been calling for ever since the outbreak of the war. Are there any concrete actions in which the G7 countries can come together and provide in order to facilitate the acceleration of these ceasefire or the results that they want to see?
It would be very desirable since, some countries, even in EU, are taking individual policy line, supporting more Palestine state rather than finding a solution for overall situation in Middle East. Indeed, a call for immediate release of hostages, I think, must be very central, and we have to support release of hostages by all means. It's a central part of the remaining tension and conflict in Gaza. And in fact, what is so needed and is rightly emphasized, increased humanitarian support, probably many times to compare with today, in order to avoid any humanitarian crisis again deepening especially in Gaza. To what extent it will solving the comprehensively situation in Gaza or Middle East remains to be seen. But I hope, especially call on Iran to stop its, very aggressive actions in the region might be, a good point in this regard, because before I think Iran was strangely, ignored as a major player in this conflict as well.
All right, so it is apparent that these G7 leaders are looking for a way to resolve the current conflicts around the world, and I guess that's what these meetings are all about. So thank you so much for your input and insight and helping us unpack this very convoluted topic. So thanks again for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you.